the amount of data that we have does not, in fact, make us healthier. It can make us more aware, but we already kind of know the things that would make us healthier, and we don't necessarily need like a minute-to-minute glucose monitoring wearable to know that we need to be exercising and eating healthy and getting sleep.
Welcome to Back to the Future podcast. My name is Victor Sadia, and I talk with brilliant minds and hearts of people who want to uproot and transform the current health and wellness paradigm. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Arielle Pardes. Arielle Pardes is a journalist and senior writer for Wired, where she writes about Silicon Valley, startups, and the culture of technology. Previously, she was senior editor for Vice. She studied philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania. Yes. Arielle, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's an honor. Thank you for having me.
So you studied philosophy and gender studies. Why?
I arrived at university thinking I would be an English major. I always wanted to be a writer. I had such an appreciation for books and for the ways that writers engaged with the world. But when I arrived at university, I found that studying literature just wasn't quite the right way to answer the questions that I had at that time. Like, when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, you have a lot of thoughts about why you're here and what your purpose is and how you're supposed to be happy and how you're supposed to get along with other people. And philosophy just perfectly sets you up to explore those questions. So I took one philosophy class and just kind of fell in love. And similarly with gender studies, I think that discipline is a lot about kind of answering the questions that naturally arise as you are coming up in the world and exploring your own identity and the way you fit into society. And so they just felt like, courses and disciplines that were naturally answering the questions that I had at that time in my life. And I think, now that I'm older, I still turn to those frameworks all the time in my work and in my personal life to try to, find a way through things that feel complicated.
It's funny because you went looking for answers, and philosophy and gender studies won't give you those.
It's true.
And actually, I think gender studies being, in a sense, the necessary evolution of deconstruction and critical studies, it goes further, saying that no possible answer will emerge anytime, anywhere. And how can we stay in the unknown? I think that's one of the main things. So why? How to transfer those things into journalism now that you became one?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the impulse is very similar, right? Journalists, the whole purpose of the profession is to ask really good questions and hopefully arrive at some kind of answer. But if the question is good enough, there isn't an obvious, straightforward answer. There are going to be very many different perspectives on a particular issue. And so I think the impulse is exactly the same. I'm just a curious person and I love complexity and contradictions and, talking to people about the future. I mean, as a technology journalist, you get this all the time, right? You ask 10 different people what the future is going to look like and which innovations are going to get us there the fastest, and you'll get 10 completely different answers. And so the job isn't necessarily to decide which one is true, but to kind of find the things that are most compelling and rich and contradictory and complicated and dig into those so that people, I think, can decide for themselves.
And is that your experience working in journalism in general? Because there's a lot of journalism that will try to get one answer or just show one side of the story, because that's what the audience, in a sense, needs, and it leads to polarization and etc. I love the way you talk about journalism, but is this your experience in general, or you feel that not many outlets are ready to stay in the contradictions?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think our expectations of the news media are very different today than they were like 50 years ago. And they're also very different when you look at a newspaper or like an online news engine and a magazine. And I'm very lucky that I work for a magazine, because I think that medium offers a little bit more space to be nuanced and to chew on things that you can't quite figure out in a day, right? Part of the challenge of online news media is that everything is so immediate, and there's this race to get things done the second that they happen. And that doesn't leave a lot of time or space for people to really like investigate what's really going on. But with a magazine, we work on a timeline of many months. So something may have happened even a year ago, and you might still be chewing on the implications of it, or what really went down, or why it happened the way it did. And I find that timeline to be a little bit more comfortable for me. And that's also the stuff I like to read. Like I don't actually read a ton of online news. I like to read, the feature story that comes out in Harper's Monthly, that, makes sense of something even like a year later.
Yeah. And in that sense, yes, complexity needs time. And also, if we're in this attention economy where it's only a matter of you have 5 seconds to grab someone's attention, and then the business model is based on that, then there's a lot of, I won't say potential conflict of interest, but definitely there's a bias on what you can show, how can you show it, and then move to the next thing.
Yeah, exactly.
How, and I know you just wrote a piece on Elon Musk's buying Twitter, and I think it's interesting to show that you said it very well. Like it's still, he wants to decentralize the control of the information, but at the same time, it's still being centralized in him or his company.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that? And then probably we can talk about the potential of blockchain decentralizing control, and what goods and what bads will emerge out of that too.
Yeah. So, I have a lot of thoughts about Elon Musk and Twitter that I'm not even going to get into, because that would take another 45 minutes. But I do think that one of the interesting threads to have emerged from that particular story is this idea that so much of the media is controlled by a small handful of billionaires, primarily American billionaires. So you have, some of the largest newspapers in the United States are owned by Jeff Bezos or Michael Bloomberg. You have Elon Musk now sweeping in to buy what we think of as the sort of digital town square. So I think that's quite interesting in terms of like what the news actually, what the news becomes and how the news is framed, and the incentives of the people sort of distributing it. I don't know that blockchain is like a perfect solution to that, to be honest. I have yet to see exactly how that would pan out. And for that reason, I'm a little skeptical. I think I'm always skeptical of things that I can't really imagine for myself. But I'd be very happy to be proven wrong there. But yeah, I mean, I think in general, we are kind of seeing writing and the news and media trending toward a more decentralized model, even without blockchain. So you see like the rise of like Substacks, or the kind of like neo blogging thing that we're seeing emerge right now, or even the fact that like anyone can make and distribute their own podcast. Like that is a pretty interesting development that stands in direct contrast to kind of like what the news media has been for many decades. And so I think it'll be interesting to see like what the result of that is, whether that's a diversity of opinion that helps to control for all of the polarization, or if it's in fact just more polarization, and more people kind of just operating in their own silos, and kind of talking over each other, right? Like in some ways, I think the solution wouldn't be decentralization where like everyone has a little platform that they can speak on, but actually like something that's collaborative, right? In some ways, we do want to come together in a more centralized way. We just want to do it such that it promotes conversation and not just people talking over each other and arguing.
Yeah, and you said a lot of words that we repeat a lot in this podcast related to the medical health wellness industry, which is decentralization, not working in silos, and looking for the empowerment of the patient or the health professional in deciding for its own health.
Mm-hmm.
You work in a sense. Well, your main topic is tech, no, in its intersection with the social, the cultural, and even the what we can term as health. Um, what drove you to, or what still drives you to keep writing about health? What's the question that's still in your mind all the time when you're talking about health?
Well, I would say my primary attraction is to the way that technology either changes or reveals something about how we as humans move through the world. So I think all good journalism is kind of like focusing on the moment when something changes, right? It's this like turning point, whether that's in relation to innovation or an interpersonal relationship or geopolitics or whatever. You're looking for those moments where everything changed. And you get a lot of them in technology, which is why it's a cool field to be looking at. But with respect to health, like I've written a lot of health stories that I didn't even, technology is really changing everything. And what does that mean for the people who are interacting with it? So I'll give a couple just quick examples. The first story I wrote for Wired, actually, the very first one was about breast pumps, which are devices that millions of women use every year when they're breastfeeding, but which hadn't fundamentally changed since like the 1800s. Like the modern breast pump at the time still looked pretty similar to what people used in like the 19th century, and frankly used to milk cows, which is horrible. Like, I mean, you could talk to any woman about these devices and they'd say they're uncomfortable, they're noisy, they're heavy, they break all the time. Like, I can't use them, covertly. I have to be tethered to the wall. It's a horrible experience. But it wasn't until 2017 that any startup really decided that was a problem worth solving. And then all of a sudden there were like tons of startups trying to create a better breast pump. And I thought that was such an interesting story, kind of at the intersection of women's health and startups and technological innovation and kind of consumer gadgetry, where for some reason, like all the stars just aligned, and the net result was that a lot of women had a much better experience with breast pumps, and VCs for the first time saw that that was a category that could be a really good investment. And so now, I mean, the landscape has changed dramatically, and not just in that particular category, but with women's health in general. Like, it's a very, very hot startup category now, which is kind of remarkable to see. So yeah, I mean, those stories I think are interesting to me because they're not just about our health, but they're about how like we can kind of work with technology to live better, and also about like who gets to live better, right? Like who is inventing the technology for whose benefit. Yeah,
which I think gender studies is allowing you to ask very good questions.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the thing with technology. In a sense, we sometimes believe that technology is over here and we are over there and we are separate. But yes, we are already technology. We are cyborgs. We are products and producers of this technology. And because it's so embedded in what we are, in that sense, everything that we are is concerning to health. What is health? What is life? What are the main implications or worries that you have when you are investigating your stories and this continually drive to keep technologizing our health, our life, our death, and what happens even after death?
Yeah, wow, these are great questions. Well, one concern I have is just in general, and this applies very specifically to health, but to other categories as well, is whether or not technology becomes kind of like a distraction from the real problems. So you see this a lot with health, where there's this impulse to gather more data, to augment our understanding of our own health. I mean, you see this with wearables. Like there's so much going on in the wearable space that's really cool in terms of like what we can now track in real time with our bodies. But at times it feels like a distraction, right? Like the amount of data that we have does not, in fact, make us healthier. It can make us more aware, but we already kind of know the things that would make us healthier, and we don't necessarily need like a minute-to-minute glucose monitoring wearable to know that we need to be exercising and eating healthy and getting sleep. Like those are things that we can just kind of do without. So I think there sometimes is an element of distraction with technology in health. And I also think that there's sometimes an overconfidence in what technology can do. So this again applies to categories far beyond health, but technology is really just a term we use for tools that help us understand something better. So in the health space, going back to wearables, there are some amazing advances in kind of things that can pick up on electrical impulses on your skin, or that can take a very, very small amount of blood and give you very sophisticated readings in real time, or, any number of other devices. There are devices you can wear on your head that help track, what stage of sleep you're in at night, or mattresses that use your basal temperature to track your sleep at night. I mean, all kinds of really cool things. And in terms of innovation, like those tools are much more sophisticated than what existed 50 years ago. But I also think that we can put too much faith in them. Like those sleep tracking devices are sort of notoriously faulty and wrong. And I think, I've anecdotally had so many friends kind of, wake up or come into the office in the morning and they look at their like Aura ring, and the Aura ring says they slept really badly, but they feel rested. And then they have this kind of crisis of confidence, did I actually sleep badly? And they tend to over index on their trust in the device rather than their own lived experience. So, I think there's value in having that data, but there's also value in kind of trusting yourself and knowing what it feels like to be in your body, and, using that as a compass to decide what to do for your own health.
Yeah. And, it's this overconfidence, I think, can be perfectly well explained because technology has done so many great things, and it really has done a lot of work for us, like the dishwasher or even the peel. And, that solved a few problems. And now we're just waiting for the next machine or the technological advancement that will eradicate cancer or will curb global warming. But I think that's one of the biggest dangers. One, technology itself produced those huge crises. And second, we believe that the solution will be on the technology. And that will definitely keep us distracting, that probably what we need to do is just trust who we are and not only what our phone is saying.
Yeah, totally. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next, decade or two, there's a group of people who kind of move toward more simplification in their relationship to technology. I guess we're kind of already seeing this in some respect. Like there was a movement some years ago for people to ditch their iPhones and get what are called light phones. So like really beautifully designed phones that do kind of the basic things you need. There's like a map function, and you can, make a phone call and call an Uber, but there's no social media on it. And, I think there is this kind of like societal impulse toward simplification and to like be free of distractions. And I don't know, I can imagine a kind of stratification in the future where like there's a group of people who is highly tethered to their devices, and they're sort of hoovering data from their own, bodies and lives at all times. And then there's like another group of people that's like just craving simplicity and wants to kind of like live the Henry David Thoreau life with technology being very minimalistic.
Yeah, I read a few weeks ago. There's a French, well, it's a Spanish philosopher, Paul Preciado, in queer studies and gender studies, and he said that he believes that the future of our planet and our species, because it's really in danger, is that we need to move into an epistemological model more related to something that he calls a technoanimism, which is really embodying that we are technological through and through. But at the same time, we need to have this animistic sense of being, ontological being, that we are connected between each other, between the planet, the species, and everything. It's an interesting proposal, right?
Yeah, and I love that term, technological animism. Yeah, I think that's really smart. I'm gonna have to read that and get back to you with my deeper thoughts. But I'm fascinated.
Yeah, and in that sense, I think it's in, and probably you are at the intersection of giving dystopian or utopian fantastic accounts of what could happen with all the things that we're seeing, and in a sense also playing with those stories, because it's the philosophy is done working at those extremes, but at the same time resisting the urge of just being a hard optimistic or a hard pessimistic on the things that are happening. How do you manage these two forces in your work and in the public conversations that you have?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like the central challenge of being a journalist, is that you come into every story with some bias. I tend to be an optimist, and I have to kind of like rein that in. I don't typically come into my stories with a cynical perspective, and I'm lucky that a lot of my editors are hugely cynical, and so there's a kind of inherent balance there where like my first drafts tend to be, I think, a little too freewheeling and happy, and then my editors will sometimes throw some cold water on these ideas. But I guess the other answer I could give is that the more research you do and the more people you talk to, the more the nuance will come through. So one example I'll give is that I did some reporting a couple of years ago on brain-computer interfaces, which is a very interesting, and I mean, speaking of sort of humans being cyborgs, like a super interesting reality that we are coming into, where already there are a number of people with severe neural disabilities, people who have conditions like ALS or paralysis. These people are already being augmented with brain-computer interfaces to be able to restore movement in their body, which is insane. Like, it's truly like insane. But we're also coming into a reality where a number of companies are trying to create these devices for everyday people. So, I've even demoed some of these early devices where you strap them to your wrist and they pick up on neural impulses that come through your arm, and then help people effectively like type without typing. So you can like be thinking about moving your arm in a certain way, and it produces letters on a screen. It's very heady. And my instinct with that is like, wow, that's amazing. That's so cool. I want to run toward it. And I was like so excited to demo these things and, talk to people. But, the more you talk to folks who have been in the space for a long time, the more you kind of see like reasonable concerns to that future and questions about who controls that technology and who it's for, and what it comes at the expense of, and whether it is really just a neutral thing, which it could be. Like, it could be like the next iteration of like a computer mouse and keyboard, or it could be something totally different. Like, it could be the next sort of like data mining exercise of big tech. Like, who knows? So I think the answer here for journalists, but also probably just for like anyone who's finding themselves feeling really strongly about one thing, is that the more you talk to people and the more you invite in different perspectives, and the more you really try to understand like what people smarter than you think about an idea, the more these things become complicated in your own mind. And I think that's a thing that I'm lucky that I get to do for work, is just complicate my own biases all the time.
Yeah. You work very closely with the Silicon Valley, the startups, the culture of technology. How do you see these nuances and these deep questions being addressed in the startup ecosystem? Like, are the people founding these companies really aware of these biases and philosophical implications, or it's more like a let's drive for growth and then we'll take care of those things later?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in general, it tends to be the latter. the way, I mean, this kind of gets into like the financial models of most startups, but it doesn't really make good financial sense to move slowly and like hem and haw over decisions, especially when there's a decision in front of you that can lead to great growth. But one thing I will say is that there has been a pretty significant movement over the last several years among startups and also larger tech companies to incorporate like ethical frameworks, which is very gratifying to me, and I'm sure it would be to you, because it's basically just like applying philosophy to business decisions. So there are a number of like sort of formal toolkits and guidebooks that you can follow as a startup engineer or designer or founder, to guide your decisions. And it's almost like, I'm sure you've done this in like sort of your early philosophy coursework, but it's almost like going through like 3 ethical frameworks. You'll be like, okay, if we are being utilitarians, like what would we decide? Like if we are going to apply Kant's categorical imperatives, like what would we decide? If we're optimizing for what we said was our company value, right? Like our company allegedly cares about sustainability. So like how would we optimize for that? A lot of tech companies have these sort of like catchy mantras. Like Google's for a long time was "Don't be evil," and Amazon always says they put the customer first. But I think those things are worth interrogating in this kind of philosophical way, right? Like, what are you really prioritizing? Who are you really optimizing for? So yeah, I think there's been a movement toward that. There's an organization in Silicon Valley called the Center for Humane Technology, which has been leading a lot of this stuff. And then there are a couple of other organizations that are working as well. But I do think that like we're moving toward a world where these things are considered more often, and it's maybe too soon to see whether or not they just become kind of like lip service or not. But yeah, I think if more technologists were philosophers, then we would be in a better position.
Yeah, and I think that's the big worry, that like the ethical discussion only gets discussed because it's the it's peer pressure or media pressure or consumer pressure, and not really engaging deeply with those questions, which most of the time won't have answers. And the same product that you're pushing will create new questions that there's no way that there are a lot of unknowns.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is always the dilemma with biotech and all those things. Like ethics is always a step behind by necessity, because those problems weren't even possible or probable, because the technology wasn't even there, with cloning, with abortion, with all the things that have been happening and will continue. So yeah, and in a sense, it's going back to this animism, in a sense that it's really not only of philosophizing intellectually, but also emotionally, like who we are and what is death and what are we doing here. And paradoxically, and capitalism and technology will do this all the time. We'll take these big things. You've done a lot of work in the technology of death and the future of grief, and I would love to hear some stories of this, and package it and giving it to you back as a product that you will pay a membership for it.
Yeah. I find this topic so interesting, as you know. What should I tell you about it? Where to begin?
There's a company called Memories that they say that someday they will be able to use AI to animate ourselves for even longer, maybe even having after leaving this planet, and even have back and forth chat with our loved ones that they left a few years ago.
Yeah, I find this company so interesting. They started as a very simple idea, which was effectively like a digital graveyard, like a place where you could post a message to your dead loved one and leave them little digital flowers. And they've just very quickly kind of followed themselves to the next logical extreme, including they have a product now where you can record a message to send to your loved one after your death. they have these really funny commercials. I mean, they're not supposed to be funny, but funny to me, where, it's like a kid is like texting his dead grandfather, like, I miss you. I played really well at the baseball game today. Like, thought of you today at dinner, like it would have been your birthday. And of course he gets no messages back because his grandfather is dead. And then on his 18th birthday, he receives this message back, and it's a video that his grandfather had recorded before his death. And it says like, "Hey son, you'll be 18 now, and I love you." I think it's, I have so many complicated feelings about it, right? This is like another one of these cases where like I'm fascinated, and I can't quite decide if I'm like super into it or a little turned off by it. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people working in this space to build products like that, sort of around this idea that technology can already approximate our likeness well enough that we might be able to use that to sort of like approximate immortality almost, or give our survivors something to interact with that approximates our immortality. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm curious like where you fall on this, because I find myself flip-flopping all the time in terms of like whether I think this is amazing or kind of terrifying. Where do you fall?
The same. It's fascinating, and at the same time really it worries me, basically also because the process of grief and grieving is so important for our human development, I guess. And the quest for immortality, I think it's great in a sense, but also we need our mortality. And that mortality will give us a lot of meaning. So pathologizing death or just extending ourselves indefinitely will just postpone all the grieving that we must do as time goes by with our lives. So I'd love to have this technological world where deep emotions can really be felt in all the spectra. Not only, yes, I got the message from my grandfather 20 years after he left. That's amazing. But at the same time, feeling the feeling of his absence forever. Right. That's also very powerful. Right. So yeah, and I think you wrote about this. Like tech is in general, they are realizing, big companies and you, that the people have deep emotional needs, and there's a huge space for these companies and products and services to really empower these connections. And I think in that sense, more augmented reality and all those things can, if it goes to the feelings and the emotions, I think it's very powerful and also potentially lucrative.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to bring it back to philosophy with a metaphor here, but it reminds me almost of the ways that a lot of sort of early theological philosophy is concerned with the idea of death and what happens afterward. And the idea that your life is just preparing for an afterlife, right? That really on earth, you're just preparing to go to heaven, is very comforting. And I think it sort of hits like a human nerve, like really precisely. It makes us feel good, but it also leaves us vulnerable to control, right? So like the sort of groups that present this philosophy are ones that then can kind of use it to their advantage to say, this is how you should behave on earth. This is what you have to pay to have a nice afterlife. And you're sort of, you're not as free as you would be otherwise. Whereas, I think of other very ancient philosophies, like the Stoics are kind of my favorite example here, who are also obsessed with death, write about it all the time, think about it daily, but take a very different perspective, which is that, you will die and that's the end. And you can't guarantee what happens after, and you can't guarantee how long you have, and you just have to get comfortable with that. And, I think that's far less comforting. It's terrifying to live like that, but it does make you freer in a sense, because, if you accept that reality, then you can't have the alternative used to exploit you. So yeah, I think that, I mean, there are sort of death tech ideas on both sides of the spectrum. There are products and companies that are interested in extending life and sort of neutering the feelings that come from deep grief and from saying goodbye. And even like some of these companies, their taglines will be things like, you know, never have to say goodbye, which is, you know, I can understand that. But then there are also products like I use this app called WeCroak. It sends you a push notification 5 times a day, just reminding you that you're going to die. That's all it does. And I find that sort of delightful as well, more in the like stoic camp of just ways that technology and the immediacy of a push notification can be used to remind you that it's coming. You don't know when, and you can't do anything about it. You just have to accept it. So I quite like that one as well.
Yeah, I'm sure this democratization of experiences and because that's the good thing also about apps, that they're diverse and we're addicted to them, and in a sense we'll get to explore different ways of dealing with death and grieving through them, and then that will necessarily evolve this cultural meaning of what death means and what death is. And in that sense, I think it will be, I think, good, because we will have more narratives to work with instead of this religious narrative that we live in the West, in a sense. And other philosophies are really, you know, they're not part of our vision, you know. So yeah, that will be great, and it's already happening. That's the cool thing.
Yeah. It's a pretty nascent space, which is cool. I always like finding those spaces in my work because it's, I mean, if you kind of get in early, you can kind of know everyone who's working there. So yes, I very much aspire to be like a death tech writer for years to come until my death.
Sounds amazing. I think that it's great gasoline for a life.
Yes.
And
beautifully put.
Yeah, and at the same time, you'll help us, you know, your readers, the stakeholders that will read your metaphorical, your philosophical, and your existential dilemmas, will certainly make their way in their own lives, in their own companies, and in their own way of consuming media and apps. And I think that's you know, that's you know, I'm very much like you in that sense. That's the important thing, is the question, not only the answer. The same way we started with this conversation. So just tell me a little bit about your personal life. Why did your father change your last name, or his last name?
Oh, this is it's a story. I should also say that I've heard multiple versions of this story growing up, and so I cannot confirm that this is the true one. This is just the one that I've heard the most, but you ask different members of the family and they tell you different things. But the short version is that my father's given last name was Pollock. My paternal grandfather is Polish, and that was the name that my father grew up with. And in his late teens or early 20s, he was kind of finding his way in life and ended up working as a shepherd on a kibbutz in Israel, as one does when they're finding their way in life, and had this kind of like spiritual moment where he was looking out on his sheep and these like rolling hills, and saw in the distance this just spectacular orchard. And the word for orchard in Hebrew is pardes, but it has like multiple meanings. It also refers to kind of like not just any orchard, but a almost like Garden of Eden kind of orchard. And it's also an acronym for a way to read the Torah. So my dad, being someone who likes wordplay and is sort of a spiritual person, came back to the United States and decided that was going to be his last name. And then, you know, oddly enough, my aunt, his sister, decided to change her name as well. So we've kind of created our own little name for ourselves. I've been meaning actually to do some more research on the last name. I've always kind of felt strange about it because it's a made up last name. It doesn't like connect to anyone else in the world. But like, I would say 2 times a year, I get an email from someone. It'll be like, I'll have like gone on the radio to talk about a story, or like a story I've written has like gone pretty, like has been circulated widely. And someone will send me an email and say, hey, my last name is also Pardes. Do you think we're related? And I always have to write back and say, like, definitely not, because mine doesn't connect to anyone. But I have found this whole like tribe of Pardes people in the world, and I kind of want to like connect them to each other and make like our own little Pardes tribe.
I love the story, and I think that there's one thing is the Garden of Eden, and knowing that we are living in that Garden of Eden, and really putting it in our name. I think it's part of this animism of really connecting. And the second thing is naming things. And as you know, as a philosopher and as a journalist, the name we give stuff is very important.
Yes.
In this podcast, we talk a lot about the new paradigms of health and wellness, and we know that we need new words, new concepts, new way of addressing the things that we want to change, not only by explaining them and changing the way that they work, but also the way we name them, from emotions and feelings to the way that we want to name our institutions, like hospitals and clinics and all those things. Have you seen this use of new words emerging and old words, just getting out of our common conversations in the world of tech? And what does it mean for you to be part of that coining new words even?
Yeah, I love that question. There is so much power in naming things, and I think journalists have that power. Like, there are times when journalists will come up with a phrase for something, and then it kind of gets widely adopted. Institutions have that power. Doctors have that power. I'm thinking of a sort of example. The first thing that comes to mind is this example of screen time addiction being something that just was wholesale made up some years ago, but I think resonated because so many people were experiencing this thing, but didn't know it was a collective experience, didn't have a name for it, weren't quite sure how to feel about it. And I think before that term came around, like I at least felt this kind of uneasiness about how much of life was mediated by screens, but wasn't sure if it was an issue or if it was just me, or, it's just like a vague sense. And then I remember sort of that term becoming really popular in like 2018 or so. And feeling like all of a sudden there was this huge momentum about like what to do about it and how much screen time was too much and what was really the threshold of addiction. And like, it wasn't just sort of like technologists and parents and educators weighing in, but it was like actually like clinicians weighing in about what were the effects of too much screen time and what was the relationship to mental health and what was the relationship to physical health. And was there really something called tech neck, which is like when your neck gets stuck in a weird position from looking down at your phone too much. So yeah, I mean, I think there's huge power in that. Of course, like the interesting thing with that case is that I think the fervor built up really quickly, and then there was this like backlash to it. Like people were like, that's not an appropriate use of the term addiction. And like, we don't actually know what the effects of this thing is because we haven't studied it. And there's this kind of like, skepticism that comes in after the initial wave of excitement. But with that example, like that's something that I think about a lot. And I'm grateful that there is a term for it because it provides sort of a framework with which to think about like what is happening in that space.
Definitely. To begin wrapping this conversation up, how can we bring these discussions, these philosophical discussions, which won't have much answers, but the values in the questions themselves, and democratize it even more. Like you said, like people won't read 4 pages long articles on Wired all the time. They need,
Yeah.
quick things. And we talked about, and we also know that these questions are in a sense in the back of everybody's mind, but we don't have the time or even the courage to continually face those things. And at the same time, I think the future of humanity, and I don't like to use those big names lightly, but the future of humanity depends on being a more critical, existential, philosophical community, global community. And I think there's arguably a lot of arguments to show that we're not going in that direction. So on top of being a great journalist as you are there any other ways that we can legitimize these conversations and potentially push them through the medical, the cultural, the social, the political, the educational realms of our life?
Oof, that's a huge question, my friend. I think that these questions, once they're asked, become really easy for people to get interested in. Like, I think back to being an undergraduate and discovering philosophy for the first time and discovering the kinds of questions I could ask and the kinds of questions other people had asked throughout time, and finding that just immediately like I just recognize something in myself immediately, right? So I think sometimes if the right questions are asked around you, right? If you hear a great question on the radio, if you hear someone raise a concern in your community, if a doctor at your annual checkup sort of frames something for you in a new way, then I think it's easy to take that in your life and like repeat that question to your friends and your family and in your community and your educational system in your workplace. I guess what I'm saying is, like, I think that we all have a part to play in kind of raising those questions and getting people thinking in that kind of way. But I think most people are curious and are craving that kind of exploration, right? I think like most people don't want to just like listen to the nightly news and hear what their opinions are supposed to be and then repeat them on as if they're just like reading from a script. I think most people like are really attracted to questioning, or maybe that's just me and you, but I certainly feel like the people in my circle are attracted to that questioning. So yeah, I guess we all just have a part in asking more questions. And I think like, everyone can kind of play that role. I think about how often clinicians, are kind of rushed through their interactions with patients such that it's just about getting out as much information as quickly as possible and like not really leaving a lot of room for nuance. But what if we kind of like flip that model on its head, where it was more about like, not answering what we do know, but like raising questions about what we don't know. And like, here are some things that you could try on your own. Here are some things you could test for yourself. Here are some things you could try them on and see if they feel good. Like, who knows? This is a horrible answer to your question because it's so non-specific, but I think we all just need to do our part in raising questions and skepticism about things.
You know what? I think it's the best answer, because we can't really expect that someone will build this critical thought community. And no, it's basically, if you are seeing a doctor or you are a doctor, and if you're in the store or you are, attending the store, do it right there and then in your daily interactions. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just also a matter of being, I won't say courageous, but at least not feeling shunned or shamed by speaking these questions that everyone has in their minds.
Yeah.
That's the thing I discovered when I launched my blog, which I told you about, is that my personal meditations were resonating.
Yes.
And it's just legitimizing this way of being that we sometimes, even also because we have these phones and social media, we just want to project an image, which is fine, but there are many other images that we are also and we are not putting out there.
Yes.
So yes.
Yes, I love that. Yeah. Do you find that you are interacting with the world differently now that you've put out these different parts of yourself? Like now that you've shared these thoughts on your blog that you previously would have kept privately, does that change how you interact with the world?
It's changing a lot how I'm living my life, because now I live my life, which is not always a good thing as a creator.
Mm.
And then everything is a material. Every experience, even a fight with someone, is material. But at the same time, it's a very therapeutic way of seeing your life, an existential way of seeing your life, that this is not the end, and we are in a process always. So as always with artistic creation, there's good and bad things with your own personal way of being, and there's no way of really hiding that. And now with our phones and the social media, it's already happening. Is that we are a bit more conscious that this is already happening,
Yeah.
instead of just posting a photo expecting that that's not really an interaction with the world, and the world is seeing you in that way, and then you will keep projecting or not images that world will resonate with or not. And you have an article on this, like living your life through the numbers that
Mm-hmm.
the social media gives you. Like we don't
Mm-hmm.
realize that the rules that we create to ourselves to act within the system are based on the amount of followers, the amount of clicks, the amount of things that we can measure, and it's really messing with our own sense of being. Do you want to
Yeah.
share about that? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I have lots to say about this. The piece was basically an experiment in demetricating my social media. So using a bunch of little, this is before Instagram was hiding the likes, decided to hide the likes on their platform. But to take the numbers off of Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. So you could no longer see how many people replied to a post or liked it, or how many comments there were, anything like that. And I found myself feeling very disoriented, but also very free. Like, yeah, we don't realize how much of our motivations are built by these sort of invisible systems, like trying to get more likes. I didn't realize I was so motivated by that, but in fact I was. And yeah, I think what was so cool about that experiment was that it just allowed me to like answer a what if, like what if I interacted with people online for a reason other than getting attention or interaction rather. And I think, that goes back to what we were saying about questioning, right? Like you don't have to have the answers. You don't have to necessarily want to change the status quo. But I think it's really important to constantly be asking, what if things were different? What if they were completely different?
Amazing. You just reminded me, I have a book here on Maggie Nelson. I don't know if you heard of
Oh
her.
yes, I
Yeah.
love Maggie
Wow.
Nelson.
Yeah. So the next question will be about her, but she's putting a poem from Alice Notley, which is a poet, and says, "My rule for this poem is honesty. My other rule is fuck you." And in a sense, that's the thing with social media. We want to say fuck you, we gain our traction saying fuck you, and then we are just entrapped by that
Yes.
fuck you that we once said.
Yes.
Like the vegan person that was vegan and got 1 million followers because she was vegan, and then she doesn't want to be vegan anymore. Now she can't.
Yeah. It's true. It puts us in these weird silos. And even like the way that so much of our lives online are mediated by algorithms. This goes far beyond social media. I mean, the music we listen to on Spotify, the targeted ads we get for shoes to buy, all of these things are mediated by algorithms, which further kind of like seek to reduce us to one type of person or one dimension of a person. And I think that's quite scary, because it assumes that we are not only one dimensional, but also that we're unchanging, and that our interests, right now are going to continue to be our interests for years to come. And I think it's really easy to like fit into that invisible system and just be like, but sure. I mean, like, I'm good with who I am right now too. But really, I think it's more exciting and more human to embrace novelty and change and constantly be asking, like, what if I was completely different?
Yeah, and that's why you have to change your last name once more.
Yes,
and appear in
reinvention.
another part of the country, and writing from another pen name.
Oh, I love that plan for the future. Thank you
Yeah,
for
yeah,
planting that in my head.
yeah. But don't tell us what's your next name. You
No,
want
I'll
to
just
start from
disappear.
zero. Yeah.
I'll just disappear. Mm-hmm.
Tell me about Maggie Nelson. Why do you like her?
Um, she's a beautiful writer. Um, she's kind of a strange writer. Like, she has a very unique voice. Um, and she writes very honestly about what it's like to be a woman, what it's like to be queer, what it's like to be aging. Um, all things that I think can be quite unsexy to talk about. And she doesn't do it in a sexy way, but she does it in an amazing way. Yeah.
I was planning to post actually a quote from her
Mm-hmm.
this morning that says, "Mothers always fail. This should not be as catastrophic, but as normal."
Oh, yes.
And I think that's basically also the same thing we can say about this conversation about technology and health, is that we won't really succeed. But that's not catastrophic. Let's just keep talking about it, and let's find the beauty and even awe of just being here and having the privilege of thinking, of sharing, of not knowing what is all about.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, it places more of an emphasis on questioning and creating and exploring rather than finding the answer or finding perfection in a project.
Arielle, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I'm really happy that we reconnected and that we basically just continued where we left it off a few months ago.
I know.
Yeah, thank you. We look forward to keep reading your stuff, and I will post a note to your link in Wired because it's really you guys, everyone should check it out. And yeah, this is your home, and thank you for enriching your home.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. This was incredibly fun. And yeah, I hope we just continue the conversation.
We will. Have a great day.
Thank you.